Hey everyone, we reached 100 subscribers, like 2 months ago. As of writing this script, we're past 200. This took me a really long time, okay? Anyway, 100 subscribers is a really big milestone, so I wanted to do something special for it. So here I am, hand sewing 100 sock plushies and donating them. All the socks are pre-washed. As you can see here, I'm taking them off a drying rack. Before I started sewing, I had to do a bit of math. So I bought 4 packs of socks with 7 pairs in one pack, which gets me what I thought was 58 socks. That number was actually 2 socks off. You'll see how that affects things later on. So most of the time, it takes 1 sock to make a sock plushie. I kind of didn't feel like spending over $100 on socks, so what I decided to do instead was make a whole lot of birds. Now, if you're careful, you can make 2 birds out of 1 sock, which means you can make double the amount of plushies as normal. With 4 packs of socks, I had 8 extra socks, so I decided to make 8 less birds and replace them with other designs that use more sock fabric, like, say, pigs and rhinos, for example. Hopefully that made sense. My friend helped me with the math. Here I'm just sorting the socks into 42 for birds and 16 for other plushies, making sure the colors match up with the plushies I'm going to make with them. You can see me consulting the conversation I had with my friend about the math in the corner there. With all that prep work out of the way, I was ready to start actually making the plushies. Throughout all 84 birds, the process mainly stayed the same, however I did make slight optimizations for security, neatness, and speed. So to start, I cut both ends off of the sock. As always, I'm going to be using my white upholstery thread for these plushies because it's really strong and durable and it also shows up well on camera. Also, these birds won't have the colored head like the birds I made in my tutorial because I'm already really tight on sock fabric. Next, I stuff the plushie. What do you guys think? Will I run out of stuffing in my gigantic stuffing bag after 100 plushies? Next, I running stitched it closed. I know I say this in literally every single one of my videos, but a running stitch is like threading and closing a drawstring bag. In sewing clothing and stuff, a running stitch is something different. This would be more similar to a gathering stitch, but I use the term running stitch because it's what most people who make sock plushies use. I always make sure to tuck in the ends while I'm doing running stitches. I know it looks a lot less satisfying to be tucking in edges while pulling, but trust me, it wouldn't work if I didn't. Next, I drew out 4 wings on the heel of the sock that I cut away earlier. I stitched around 3/4 of the wing with a small back stitch and cut it out with my fabric scissors. Then I turned it inside out and stitched it closed, again making sure to tuck in all the edges. And here I'm just stitching it to the body. I completed the other plushie from the other half of the sock in the same way. The only difference was I had to running stitch both ends closed because, you know, no heel. And I also did the faces on both later. From this point on, I decided to make the plushies in batches of anywhere from 4 to 10 because it saves a lot of time and it also feels like I'm getting more done. I apologize in advance for changes in lighting and voiceover quality because I was working on the plushies over the course of about a month and the voiceover for, I don't know, because this is only the beginning of a very, very long voiceover track. The lighting does get a bit better because I start filming less at my desk as the video goes on though. Here you can see me running stitching closed to one of the plushies that does not have the toe of the sock. I also started using colored Sharpies to mark the fabric because since it's a closer color to the sock than black, I don't have to be as careful about smudging and the seams are a lot less visible without the slight black line. Highly recommend, I will definitely be doing this in the future. I also saved all the sock scraps too small to be reused so that I could use them as stuffing in the future. I started out using black embroidery thread for the eyes, and I really hated how it looked, and it was just a huge pain to work with. I did fix these later on, don't worry. With the next batch of plushies, I switched to a DK weight black yarn, and I liked that much better. I'll talk more about the face later on. So I just continued with the next batch of socks, cutting off the toe and leg of each sock. Another thing I didn't like with the last batch was how the proportions were off and the birds were taller than they should be, so I took special care to cut the lengths of sock a bit shorter, like how I did in my tutorial. This actually worked to my advantage because I didn't have to skimp and make the wing so small, which was another problem in the first batch. What is this, a plushie roasting session? As you can see here, much better lighting. Anyway, I cut a length of black, light worsted weight yarn, double the length of my arm. Then I doubled it up and knotted it, and marked out a placement for the eyes with 2 pins. I hid the end of the yarn in the wing, and carefully tied 2 knots close to the fabric where the pin was. And I did the same thing for the other side, then came out the other wing and tied a knot before cutting my thread. I then did the same thing on all the other plushies. Doing yarn eyes is kind of finicky because you want to do them close to the surface of the fabric so that the knots have something to lean on and can stack into a nice large circular shape. But you don't want to go too close to the surface or the fibers of the sock will get stuck in the knot and it won't look good. I should also mention why I'm not using my normal method of super glue and flat-to-back beads, because it's really just glue holding them on, and these plushies are going to kids and I want them to be as secure as possible. These yarn eyes aren't going anywhere. For the beak, I threaded some bulky weight gray yarn into a large yarn needle, securing it in the same way as the black yarn, then passing over a part of the face over and over to make a beak shape. You may notice that I did not double up this yarn because if I did, then it would have been way too thick. Similar to the eyes, I didn't use my normal method of needle felting the beak because, again, these plushies are going to kids and also it would have taken a lot longer to do. And with that, the 16 yellow birds were finished and I could move on to the blue birds. Again, the process with these is pretty similar to the yellow birds, so I thought I'd just take this moment to talk about why I haven't been posting for the last 2 months. In short, the answer is this. This took me absolutely forever. It took a week or so to organize and buy materials, then a little over a month to make the plushies, and then 2 weeks and counting for editing. I honestly don't know why my sub count keeps on rising when I haven't been posting. It's nearly doubled in the last 2 months, but thanks guys! I have some really cool videos planned for the future, and I'll definitely be doing more sewing, and I have a couple sock plushies and crochet videos planned. Some YouTubers have been doing this thing where they say, you know, only X number of you are subscribed. Usually it's like 20 to 30%, but beat this, only 3% of you are subscribed, so please consider subscribing. It would really help me out. Just kidding, subscribe if you feel like it. I just thought it was really funny. It used to be worse, believe it or not, like 2% or something. For the purple birds, I used this yellow worsted weight yarn for the beaks because I thought it would look better than the gray. Embroidering on the beaks was actually kind of difficult because after the first stitch, the fabric gets distorted and it's difficult to judge where to insert the needle so that the beak looks good. It's kind of hard to explain. It's just something that takes practice to get right. Next, I moved on to the white socks. At this point, I realized I could use half the sock to make a chicken and the other half to make just a regular bird, so that's what I did. I cut off the toes for the regular birds, then drew the outline of a chicken on the other half of the sock. By the way, all the plushies I'm making in this video have tutorials on my channel, so if you're interested in making these for yourself, I'll leave the links in the description. It was nice to take a break from just making birds. At this point, I'd made 56 or 64, I forgot the exact number, but it was just nice to take a break for a little while and make these chickens. I cut them out, turned, and stuffed. I didn't film it, but I also needle felted all the facial details and firmly sewed them on. For the eyes, I made smaller knots than with the other birds. To secure the black yarn in place, I found an opening in the loose weave of the sock fabric that was far from where the eyes would be. Then I inserted the needle inside and let the knot slide into the plush. Then I brought the needle up to where the eyes would be, making sure to go through the stuffing. The yarn was then held in place by the stuffing inside the plush, if that makes any sense. I then drew the wings for the regular bird plushies off the scraps from the chickens and sewed them on. And finally, all I had left to do was the 8 gray birds before I could move on to the other plushies. I pretty much had the process memorized by now, so I knew exactly where to cut to get the proper shape for the plushies. Since I had so many small fuzzy sock scraps, I started stuffing a small amount into the center of each plushie, because the scraps weren't quite as soft as the toy stuffing. I also started tying regular knots as well as slip knots for an extra layer of security. To finish off my threads as securely as possible, I started tying knots above the fabric, then finding a gap in the weave and hiding the end, pulling the knot to the inside of the plushie. If done right, it's a very secure way of tying off your threads. However, if it's not, it really doesn't do anything, so it's kind of risky. Most of the time you can feel the knot pop through the fabric, and then you know you did it right. If you notice, the white socks weren't as fluffy on the inside as they were on the outside, causing the plushies to have a different texture once flipped. The gray socks were the same way, so I decided to flip them inside out before sewing them, even when I normally wouldn't. And finally, I was getting the last thread on the last bird. By the way, if you notice how there are a lot more colors of birds here than what I filmed myself making, it's because I didn't film a lot of the process and kept in even less when I was editing, because it was just really long and repetitive. I was really happy to be finally moving on to the other types of plushies, or so I thought. I counted these plushies and I recounted them and I recounted them, and I only have 80. I was supposed to have 84. Apparently I cannot multiply because I thought that 4 packs of socks would be 58 socks, which would be enough to make 84 of these style and 16 of just other plushies, but no, it's 56. So yeah, I'm gonna have to make 6 more of these to compensate, and then that'll only leave me making 13 of other plushies. I was really hoping I would be able to be done with these birds and move on to something more entertaining, but it's only 6. I made 80 of these. I can make another 6. Okay, let's go do that. So yeah, basically for some reason I thought I would have 58 socks, not 56, which screwed up my math, and I had to make 6 more birds to make up for it. 4 to make up for not having 2 socks, and 2 to make up for the 2 socks that I used. Actually, turns out I had to make 8. 1 to make up for the sock I used to make up for the first 4 plushies, and 1 as the plushie I was supposed to make with the sock I just used. If that makes any sense at all. So basically, I had to make another batch of plushies, which took about 2 extra days. One final count assured me that all was well again. Past me was pretty happy about that. We are finally finished making those 88 birds. I was working on them for a day over 3 weeks, which would be 22 days, and there were 88 of them, so that gives me an average of 4 plushies per day, which I'm not sure I believe. I felt like I was going a lot slower than that. So the plan with these is, these are just like the socks for the rest of the plushies I'm going to make. These are kind of like my free choice design kind of ones. So these gray socks can either be turned into whales or into rhinos. These blue socks are reserved for rhinos. They could also be turned into narwhals, but I kind of don't feel like needle felting for narwhal horns because those take forever. So I'm going to make these into rhinos. These white ones will turn into chickens, and chickens leave a lot of excess sock fabric, so that would be really good for making the horns. And then that just leaves these pink socks, and those are just for pigs. I haven't made the tutorial for whales yet before on my channel. That's because they're literally the same thing as the narwhals, minus the belly and the horn. But actually, whales were my very first fuzzy sock plushies that were my own design. So I actually have my very first, right here. It's a whale, see? Yeah. That ending was really abrupt. I didn't know what else to say. Anyway, here you can see me tracing out a shape for the whale, and as I mentioned, it's pretty much the exact same thing as my narwhal plush. I probably would have been able to make a bird out of the bottom half of this sock, but oh well. You can't foresee everything, I guess. have to say, my favorite detail about these whales is the stitch holding the tail into that curved position. I don't know, I just think it's really cute. I made 2 of these whales, and I made something else later on out of the 3rd gray sock. Next, I moved on to the 3 chickens. I refused to fall for the same trick as before, so I made sure to flip all my socks inside out before working with them. Just like with the first batch of chickens, I traced an outline with a yellow marker, then backstitched. I love how I'm referring to these plushie making rounds as batches, like they're cookies or something. All the excess fabric I'm cutting off here will be used to make the Rhinos' horns later on. And please enjoy these satisfying clips of me pulling the running stitches closed. Here I'm drawing the outlines of the rhino bodies. Again, if you want to watch the tutorials for these plushies, you can check the description box. Then I stitched, cut, and turned them. This is kind of random, but it's entertaining editing these clips because in nearly every one, I'm either listening to music or watching YouTube, and sometimes I forget to mute them before I speed them up, and let's just say, Billy Joel sounds quite interesting at 1.75 speed. Next, I sewed the plushie into a seated position. It's best if you do this on a table or something, because the plushies have a tendency to lean forward because the legs are positioned too far upwards. This is further exaggerated when the head is sewn on, so don't be like me. Do it on the table so that you can constantly check its standing position and make adjustments as necessary. Also, you may have noticed that I didn't add tails to these plushies because I just felt like they weren't very secure, and it would also have taken extra time because they are a bit finicky. I know this segment is really long, but it took me absolutely forever to edit down, and I can't bear to cut any out of it. Next, I worked on the heads. Each rhino needs 2 ears and 2 horns, which I made out of the scraps from the chickens and the remaining bits of blue sock. I backstitched around each ear and horn. I made 4 horns because I turned the last gray sock into another rhino, which you'll see in a minute. I accidentally left my phone in frame, so bonus points if you can guess who I'm watching. I cut each piece out, then turned them and sewed them to the head. I have to say, there's something strangely refreshing about seeing the plushies in pieces and without faces. I guess it's just because the assembly and the face are always the most stressful parts for me because it's easy to mess up. Anyway, here's the gray rhino I made. It's probably my favorite out of all 100 plushies because it's unique and there's only one, and I also think I did a really good job on its execution. As you can see, in the end, I decided to pull my eyes as tightly to the fabric as possible because of its cleaner and more reliable result, and just gave in to the fact that I would have to pull out any fibers if they got caught in the eyes. And with that, I was down to the last 3 plushies, the pigs. Pigs are really similar to rhinos, especially at the beginning. The only difference is that I try to make the feet more square, but it really doesn't make much of a difference. When it comes to the head, the ears aren't made separately and attached, but instead incorporated into the head shape. Pigs also have a snout instead of horns. these plushies, I decided to make the faces before I sewed them onto the body. It was easier to hide the ends, and it was nice not having the body getting in the way. And finally, I sewed the heads onto the bodies. I did one last count to make sure I had enough plushies, although it was really too late for me to do anything about it. Also, fun fact, since I don't know when to sneak this into the script, I only used like a third of my giant stuffing bag. I couldn't believe it. I highly recommend buying the largest stuffing bag you can store and using it for literally years. You ever wonder what 100 sock plushies look like? Finally, I sorted out all the birds' faces that I thought I could do better on. This mostly included my first batch that I wasn't really happy with, along with some other ones I thought I could fix. And here they all are. All the beaks that I replaced were replaced with yellow yarn instead of gray because I honestly think it looks a lot better on most sock colors. This took about an afternoon of work, but I think it was totally worth it. You ever wonder what 100 sock plushies in a line looks like? Well, here you go. Overall, I think this project was a ton of fun. It was nice to just have something you could work on and work towards for a month. It was a great way to commemorate 100 subscribers, and I could also help out others in the process. And since I really had no use for them, it's nice to know that they'll go to people that will appreciate them. Also, I wanted to make this really cool wall of birds, but it kept on falling. I'm having way too much fun with these, I know. Anyway, I'd like to thank you guys as well. It's been nice to have a place where I could share my interests and hobbies with people who have those interests and hobbies as well. I have a lot more exciting stuff planned, so stay tuned for that. The plushies are being donated to various local organizations through my grandmother's church, so thanks, Grandma. And lastly, if you're still here after sitting through this beast of a video, then congratulations, I guess. If you're not subscribed already, feel free to do so for more fuzzy sock plushies, crochet tutorials, sewing videos, and whatever else I feel like doing. Thanks so much for sitting through all of this, and I'll see you next time. Bye!